So it wasn't already bad enough that the United States allowed China to purchase farmland here in the United States, next to a military base, I might add, a quite sensitive one. That latest purchase was done by the Fufeng Group. It's a Chinese agricultural company. They bought 300 acres of farmland. They set up a milling plant last spring in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and it's a 20-minute drive from the Air Force Base there. And surprise, surprise, that Air Force Base is the backbone of the United States military communications across the entire globe, according to North Dakota Senator John Hoeven. They've also dug their communist claws in Texas of all places as well too. Now, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, but the Chinese billionaire Sun Guangyin invested over $100 million in Texas farmland. He said he planned to build a wind turbine farm on 15,000 acres. What makes this very concerning is that this would give him direct access to the Texas electricity grid. And also, surprise, surprise again, there's another Air Force base pretty close by. The Laughlin Air Force Base to be precise.
A windmill project near Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio has raised a red flag when it comes to foreign adversaries buying land near our military bases. The reason? Well, its owner is a former member of the Chinese Army.
It's a windmill project some say is way too close for comfort to Laughlin Air Force Base, where pilots are trained. About 130,000 acres, the size of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The problem, according to elected officials, is that the company's owner in China has ties to the ruling Communist Party.
In my opinion, it's the greatest national security concern about this project.
That was Congressman Will Hurd last year. Now Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who took over District 23, which includes Del Rio, introduced a bill in Washington, D.C. today to stop countries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea from buying land within 100 miles of military installations and 50 miles from military areas.
So, welcome to the Vision of Veritas channel, the channel where we point out the lies, deception, and the never-ending hypocrisy of the left. Today in particular, we're going to talk about, of all things, the United States ceding sovereignty, not just of our farmland, but now separate Chinese police stations are now allowed on United States soil. It kind of makes you wonder just what the Chinese Communist Party has on Biden and his administration. Not only does this potentially violate international law, but this is Chinese police personnel on United States soil. The dangers of the CCP on U.S. soil cannot be overestimated. In a recent investigation, 20-page investigation I might add, done by Safeguard Defenders, the following took place. Between April 2021 and July 2022, Chinese police persuaded 230,000 claimed fugitives to return to China voluntarily, while also admitting not all targets had committed any crimes. They did this under threat of not only their lives, but their families' lives as well. It was established that there were 9 countries that Chinese citizens were no longer allowed to travel to: Turkey, the UAE, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Laos, Cambodia, Philippines, and Indonesia. According to the CCP, these 9 countries are involved with serious telecom crimes against the CCP. New tools for persuading Chinese citizens were laid down on paper. This included denying children their right to an education in China, as well as other limitations on family members, punishing those without suspicion of any wrongdoing, kind of a guilt by association very similar to North Korea. And as a side note, this also includes government documents that stated that relatives in China that don't help the police quote-unquote persuade the individuals to come back to China, they would be investigated and or punished by the police or the internal party of the police, the CCDI. And one can only imagine what those punishments are. Their immediate families would be blocked from joining the Communist Party. They would be blocked from taking exams to become public servants or employees of state-owned companies. So in other words, not only is their education blocked, but a huge group of employment opportunities are taken away from them. Real estate that was purchased would also be vacated and auctioned forcibly by the CCP. Any personnel who had been there would be forcibly driven out, and eventually the dwellings would be demolished. So essentially, the Chinese Communist Party not only completely upends the lives of their citizens who are abroad, but they completely destroy their immediate families back in China to ensure compliance. And this is the party that we're now ceding sovereignty to on United States soil. This is the Communist Party that has Joe Biden in its back pocket, the president who was installed into power militarily. So far, the Chinese Communist Party wants to install 54 police centers, which they're calling overseas police service centers, across 5 continents, a lot of which are implicated in collaborating with Chinese police in carrying out policing operations on foreign soil, one of which is currently in the United States in New York. Now, since Rudy Giuliani is no longer mayor there, the city and the state as a whole is now turned into a cesspool, or perhaps turned back into a cesspool. That entire state is run by leftists in the Democrat Party, which of course is no surprise because, as we stated earlier, Joe Biden is a puppet of Xi Jinping. And last but not least, a law adopted September 2nd going into effect on December 1st. This establishes full extraterritoriality over Chinese and foreigners globally for certain crimes, such as fraud, telecom fraud, online scams, etc. And for those of you who don't know, extraterritoriality means diplomatic immunity. So now this begs the question, what is the real intent? What is the real goal of the Chinese Communist Party here? We have Chinese billionaires with farmland over here. We have the potential tapping into the power grid with a solar wind farm. And now we have an actual Chinese police station in New York City. The sovereignty of the United States of America is in jeopardy. It has been for quite some time. It happens slowly over time, incrementally, so it doesn't raise alarm all at once. So according to the report, they're rounding up its citizens for quote-unquote telecommunications fraud, but really, it's looking like the Chinese are using these police stations to spread the Chinese propaganda and to keep an eye on anybody who dares disagree with the Communist Party back in China. Remember, these Chinese nationalists have been persuaded, quote-unquote persuaded, to return home to China or face charges. And as we discovered earlier, facing charges really means the Chinese Communist Party coming in and hurting the families of these Chinese nationals. If they can't be persuaded to come willingly, why not make the entire family suffer just like North Korea does? Sounds like a great country, a great party to be let on United States sovereign soil, doesn't it? You know, it's not just the United States either. It's not just New York. China opened up 3 of these in Canada, specifically in Toronto. Here's what the Canadian Parliament had to say about it.
You did talk a little bit during your testimony about threats to Canadians and foreign influence. I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on the news that we have heard about the police stations that have opened up, and what you would expect from the Canadian government as a response.
It is very shocking news. Actually, it's quite a few open up in Ontario, and actually one in Markham where I lived. So actually, the Chinese agents been around, but I think openly. So actually, it's Chinese police. It's really the first time we heard, and I think like they openly doing that because there's no legislation. There's nothing to deter them, nothing to punish them. So I think actually Canada should have some new legislation. So because as police from China, they should be agent, they're government official, right? They cannot just open offices in Canada. And they claim that they just help the Chinese citizen to renew their passport. They don't need that because they have their own embassy. Mm-hmm. So they use that actually to intimidate the Chinese citizen in the past, to scare them to go back to China to face trial and then threaten their family. But now I think with the police station, actually in Markham, actually they can intimidate people like us. I've been living in Canada for many decades. Now I feel frightened. I need to install a camera in my house. So I think Canadian government need to really look into this because they actually Chinese police, so they should be considered as agents. So there should be legislation that they need to inform Canadian government that they are agents.
Never before in the history of the United States of America have our liberties been under assault the way they are today. Never before in the history of the United States have we had a president that had a militarized installation into power. Never before in the United States history have we ceded United States sovereignty to a foreign enemy. Our rights, our liberties, our freedoms are under constant assault. Our Constitution is no longer absolute. Our Bill of Rights are no longer set in stone. We have a political party that thinks that they are fluid, that they can be changed on a whim. There's a reason why our founders had separation of powers, and there's a reason why our founders made it extremely difficult to modify and or change the Bill of Rights, to add an amendment Instead, slowly, over time, like a frog in boiling water, you've all heard the analogy 1,000 times, but like that frog in boiling water, bits and pieces of what made the United States a beacon of hope for the entire world is being taken away. Our First Amendment rights are being taken away. The ability to speak freely, our religious liberties are slowly being eroded. You have the right to assemble so long as what you're assembling about has the blessing of the current Democrat political narrative. You can speak freely in publications on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can speak freely on social media as a whole so long as you toe the company line, so long as you say what is approved by the Democrat Party. With the near entirety of social media, with the most popular means and methods of communication, censoring any opposition to what the current political narrative is. Our Second Amendment rights, under the guise and under the false premise of safety and security for the children, as Democrats love to peddle, that's slowly being taken away as well. That has been for decades now. What you may not realize is without the Second Amendment, none of the other amendments that affirm your rights under the Constitution, they don't exist without them. The Second Amendment is the only thing that gives those individual liberties teeth. It's one of the only things that sets apart our Constitution from others. Some of the worst atrocities in history come after populations are disarmed. One only needs to look at history to see that. Without the rights of the citizenry to be armed, you easily turn into a totalitarian state. You easily succumb to a dictatorial machine because you have no way to fight tyranny. Regardless of your political affiliation, should raise alarms of concern throughout the nation. Without the ability of the citizenry to think freely, to say what they want, without the ability of opposition forces, so to speak out counter to what is being forced down everybody's throats, you end up with a dictatorial regime. If that doesn't raise alarms in your mind, then you have been brainwashed to a level, to an extent worthy of the Chinese Communist Party that is slowly infiltrating its way here into America. There has to be a line in the sand that is drawn. There has to be a time where we as United States citizens say enough is enough. We will not cede our sovereignty. We will not turn over our country. We will not bend to the will of the Chinese Communist Party. We will not bend to the will of the leftist party in America. We will not bend to the will of leftist ideals that are destroying the family unit, that are destroying our children, that tell white children in schools that they are a stain on America, that they are a stain on the history and founding of this country. The leftist political doctrine is telling children that if you are born white, you inherently have a problem. You are inherently guilty of sins from over 150 years ago that have no trace or lineage back to them. The public school system is nothing more than a Marxist indoctrination center for all children across America. There has to be a line in the sand. There has to be a time when you say enough is enough, and if that line is not with your own children, then you need to step back, look in the mirror. You need to ask yourself where you went wrong, how you went wrong, and what you need to do to fix it, because your kids are the most impressionable in society. They are being groomed to accept Marxist ideals. They are being groomed at a young age to accept the sexualization of everything. This in no way, shape, or form is normal, and it shows just how far we have allowed our society to decline, both ethically and morally. Our country has no foundation anymore. Our country has no principles anymore. Our school system teaches that you can be whatever you want to be, regardless of what you actually are. You can think that red is blue, and if you feel that is correct, that it's correct. We have warped and turned reality upside down, all under the guise of making you feel good, of making you feel accepted, regardless of how ridiculous and insane the idea is. There has to be a line in the sand. There has to be a time when you say enough is enough. Thank you for joining me today on the Vision of Veritas channel, where we relentlessly look for and search the truth to report on here. If you got anything out of today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. As I said before, I am still a brand new channel and I cannot grow this without you. Thank you much and take care.